It seems in recent years, people have been questioning whether lives are really important in video games. Can they really be a good mechanic, or are they just a way to add extra time to a playthrough? Well, that's all I'll be covering today. Without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Carno, and I've been wanting to talk about this debate for a while, but the thing that really pushed me was when Mania was announced to feature infinite tries and challenge mode. In case you didn't know, the original games used a life and credit system, which it called continues, but if you mastered the game by finishing with a perfect run, or without using continues, depending on the difficulty, you'd gain access to extra levels. It was a really rewarding system, and if you're interested in learning more, I have a playlist on my channel about the series. But needless to say, this was met with both positive and negative reactions, with some saying it was a bad idea, and others saying the system was antiquated and unnecessary anyway. So that's the focal point of what we'll be talking about today. But first, let's zoom out a bit here. Obviously, the concept of lives goes back to arcades. If the game was single player, they needed a way to make sure that players couldn't beat the game too quickly, or couldn't just sit there and play forever. Without paying, that is. So for every credit, you'd get a set amount of lives. But when consoles came around, this design concept never really went away. Even in the 7th generation, it was pretty common to have games with a game over screen. Of course, this design does live on, but I'd say it's now mostly prominent in mobile games. Anyway, as I said, as consoles advanced and games became more technically impressive, certain series still used lives to challenge the player. In fact, Mario was using them up until Odyssey. But leading up to the game, Nintendo's developers said they felt the concept wasn't necessary in a Mario game anymore. In fact, it's actually impossible to get a game over. Now, although I'm sure there are people who disagreed with this choice, I'd say the overall reception to this change was pretty positive. I think it was not only this game, but others around it that really started convincing people that lives are an outdated system. And obviously there are several compelling examples, but I'm not completely willing to jump on this ship. Yes, lives are a way of adding artificial challenge to a game, but artificial doesn't necessarily mean bad. Let's take a look at two platformers which are both critically acclaimed. Celeste does have a death counter, but there isn't much punishment for failing, you just go back to the start of the room. What this system means though, is that the player is encouraged to experiment through trial and error, and it also means the game can really push the player to their limits. The level design can be absolutely brutal, and if there was a game over system, I'm sure that most people couldn't even finish the game. I know I couldn't. But then take a game like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. This game is still difficult, but it doesn't reach the same heights as Celeste, if you'll pardon the pun. And if you get a game over, it's not too punishing. You just have to start the level over. And because of this, I think the life system is a good choice here. The challenge isn't necessarily about clearing a particular section here, it's about clearing the entire stage, which is why I feel it's better suited for this system. Returning to my example with the Mario series, lives had been used in 2D games since the original. So when the series jumped into the 3rd dimension, they decided to keep them in. And I'm not sure this was the right answer. Not because platformers shouldn't have lives, but because of the way the game was structured. Getting a game over in 64 does nothing unless you deliberately don't save. All it does is waste the player's time. Odyssey, on the other hand, feels much more seamless. Yeah, the game might take longer if they added lives, but it wouldn't be much harder. But there's more to it than that. It's also how the developers utilize them, and there are a couple key questions I always ask whenever lives are involved. First, does having lives benefit the game design specifically, or are they just there for the sake of extending your playthrough? Here's what I mean. Take Splatoon 2 and its single player campaigns. Main campaign, pretty isolated challenges that expect you to breathe between sections. Octo expansion, much more compact levels with specifically tailored life counts and difficulty. Of the two, I'd say Octo expansion does a much better job with the life system. And second, is having lives worth the time loss when getting a game over? Mario Galaxy is a perfect example of a game that has frustrating game overs for no particular reason. You get thrown back to the title screen, you have to reload your save, go back to the dome where the galaxy is, reselect the level, and then you're finally back to the beginning. And at least for me, it's also why so many one-credit wonder games are so unappealing. There's nothing quite so frustrating as a game that forces you to quit at the end game because you made one mistake for no reason other than screw you. I'm not getting better at the game, I'm just wasting 40 minutes of my life. So anyway, those are the two big questions to ask when a game chooses to implement a life system. And now it's time to bring the conversation around full circle. Because I haven't talked about Monkey Ball in the past 5 minutes, I'm starting to show withdrawal symptoms. This section is a little long, but bear with me because I think it's a perfect example for the argument of lives. The original Monkey Ball game was an arcade cabinet, so when it was ported to GameCube, it kept those game design philosophies. Needless to say, the life system is baked into the game design. Bananas are precious and lives even more so. So this means the devs could use them to either lead the player down a certain path or bait them to take a more risky option. Plus, bonus stages give a player a break from the gameplay to give themselves a head start on their banana hunting. Monkey Ball 2 expanded on this idea by eventually letting you buy additional lives with play points. Does it devalue lives? Yes, but by the time you get to that point in the game, you've already got to be pretty good and it's definitely an end game feature. And the game values the player's time with quick load times and almost no waiting between death animations. Yeah, you have to restart the difficulty if you want to get to the extra levels, but they're just that, extras. It's okay if you can't reach the end of Expert on your first try because you're not expected to. The game ultimately answers those two questions. So now let's look at Banana Mania. I have several issues with the changes they made with lives, but today I'm just gonna stick with how it affects the game design. On the surface, it seems like an improvement. More players can complete the challenge modes and it's better for experimentation. Again, any OG players know the feeling of getting kicked out of the challenge mode. But what's the cost? Well, now that lives are gone, bananas are basically worthless. So now the game can no longer bait you into taking those riskier options because why would you? Other than just to challenge yourself, there's no reason. The bonus stages are now completely useless, and the extra levels? Well, now so long as you don't use the assist mode, you get to play them regardless of how many times you die. It just becomes a player brute forcing their way through a bunch of stages. I know of several people who are new to the Monkey Ball series who played it for a bit but dropped the game pretty quickly when they just found themselves hitting a wall. In the originals, lives act as a skill cap. You can only play a stage when you're good enough. But not anymore. While experienced players may not have noticed, what does this mean to a new player? It means that they're just fighting a forever uphill battle, thus ruining the experience for many. Again, being able to beat a stage once is a completely separate matter from consistently beating it. All this to say, it's very easy to see on the surface why lives could be considered outdated. In fact, I'd argue that several games don't need them and shouldn't have them. But I think this is a case of throwing the baby out with the banana. I mean the bathwater. Accessibility is a good thing, but sometimes it can compromise the game's design. And obviously there are times when removing them can also be beneficial. The trouble with comparing, say, Celeste to Mario, or 2D Mario to 3D, or even Course Clear Mario to Sandbox to make a blanket statement is that it's like comparing apples to oranges because they're fundamentally different games. If you find yourself frustrated at games that use the lives mechanic, it might be a good idea to ask yourself whether the game's design could benefit from lives removal, or if that game just isn't for you. After all, not everything is for everyone. But in the end, that's just my opinion on the topic. So now let's hear your opinions. Do you think a game can benefit from a live system, or should the mechanic be retired? Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.